In a quiet museum in Heidelberg, Germany, there is a glass case that most visitors walk right past. It sits in a corner far from the uniforms and the maps and the photographs of bombed-out streets that draw the crowds. Inside this case, resting on a small velvet pad beside a stack of yellowed letters and a black and white photograph of a young woman in a laboratory coat, there is a glass vial no bigger than your thumb. And inside that vial, suspended in clear fluid, floats a twisted piece of dark metal smaller than a fingernail. The label beneath it reads simply, "Shell fragment removed from German prisoner, Texas, 1945." That piece of metal sat 8 centimeters from a 23-year-old woman's heart for 4 months. It traveled through 2 countries across 1 ocean and through 3 prison camps. She told no one about it, not because she was brave, because she believed with absolute certainty that the moment anyone found out, she would disappear forever. And the worst part of this story is not the fragment. The worst part is that based on everything she had seen with her own eyes, she had every reason to believe exactly that. But to understand why we need to go back. Back to a freezing basement in a German village. Back to the sound of American artillery. Back to January 1945, when the world she knew was falling apart. The Third Reich was dying. Not quickly, not cleanly, but the way a building eaten hollow by termites finally gives way under its own weight. On the Western Front, American and British forces were pushing deep into German territory. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army was grinding everything in its path to dust. And between those two advancing walls of steel, millions of people were moving. Soldiers, civilians, prisoners, children, all of them heading west because everyone knew one thing, even if they said nothing else. Being captured by the Americans was better than being captured by the Russians. But better did not mean safe. Nobody knew what waited on the other side. In a small village near the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the bridge that American forces would capture just weeks later in one of the most famous actions on the Western Front, a 23-year-old woman named Ilse Brenner sat in the stone basement of a signal station with radio headphones pressed to her ears. Her fingers moved across a sheet of yellowed paper transcribing Morse code, dots and dashes, the language of a war that was almost over but not quite finished, killing people. Ilse was the daughter of a pharmacist from Heidelberg. Before the war, she had studied chemistry at the University of Heidelberg, one of the oldest universities in all of Europe, a place where Robert Bunsen himself once lectured, where ancient stone walls wore coats of ivy thick as curtains. She was not the kind of woman you see in war movies. She was small. Her fingers were usually stained with ink. She had a habit of twisting her mother's silver ring when she was nervous, rotating it around and around her finger like a tiny wheel that went nowhere. She had been called into service as a Nachrichtenhelferin, a communications assistant for the Wehrmacht, because she knew English and had sharp ears. The work had been promised as safe duty behind the front lines. That was the first lie the war told her. Her family was not fanatical. The Brenners were educated middle-class people, the kind who obeyed not out of devotion, but out of fear. Her father, Heinrich, used to whisper behind closed doors late at night after the radio had been switched off and the neighbors could not possibly hear. His voice would drop so low it was barely more than breath. When this war ends, he would say, no one will admit they ever believed in it. She remembered those words. She remembered the way he said them. Eyes down, staring into a glass of cheap wine, shoulders slightly hunched, like a man carrying a weight that no one else could see. One freezing day in January, American artillery began hitting the area around her signal station. Not the distant rumble she had grown used to over the past weeks, but close. So close the ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling of the basement. A glass of water on the table jumped toward the edge as if it too wanted to run. A 105mm shell from an American M2A1 howitzer, the most common field artillery piece in the United States Army during World War II, struck the outer wall of the building directly above her. Ilse and 3 colleagues scrambled for the deeper cellar. She felt a blow across her back. Not pain exactly, not at first, more like someone had swung a red-hot iron bar into her right shoulder with every ounce of their strength. She staggered. Her knees hit the cold stone floor, but she did not fall completely. Her uniform smoldered at the back. The air was thick with the smell of shattered limestone explosive smoke and burning cloth. That smell. Anyone who has ever been close to an artillery strike knows it. You never forget it. It stays in some back room of your memory and comes out at night without warning. She did not know it yet, but a small fragment of that American shell, a piece of metal smaller than a little fingernail, but sharp as a razor and hot as a glowing coal, had punched through her heavy jacket, through the thinner shirt beneath, buried itself in the muscles beside her right shoulder blade, and come to a stop just a few centimeters from her third rib. If it had traveled a little further, just a little, it would have punctured her lung, or worse. At first, Ilse thought it was just a bruise from falling bricks. She reached behind her felt wetness and assumed it was sweat. That night, lying on a thin mattress in the basement, the wound began to speak. Not ordinary pain, a burning, as if someone had pressed a glowing ember against her skin from the inside and was holding it there, refusing to let go. She bit her lip, rolled onto her left side, tried to sleep, could not. To understand why Ilse chose silence, you need to know what she had witnessed 2 weeks before that shell hit. At a field medical station a few kilometers from her unit, another young communications woman named Renate had stepped on an anti-personnel mine while fetching water. The mine did not detonate at full force. It tore open her calf but did not take the leg. Renate was placed on a truck by 2 stretcher bearers. They told her she was going to the hospital behind the lines. She would be fine. Ilse stood at the basement window and watched the truck pull away. She saw it clearly. At the crossroads, the truck turned right, east, not west where the field hospital was, east, toward the front, toward the place no one wanted to go. Renate never came back. No one said a word. No one explained. When Ilse asked an older nurse at the station what had happened, the woman looked at her with eyes so tired they seemed to have forgotten what hope looked like. She said only 6 words. Do not ask about those who left. 6 words. Heavier than an artillery. This was the reality of the German medical system in the final months of the war. It had collapsed almost completely. Morphine supplies had run out by late 1944. Penicillin, which the Allies were producing by the hundreds of millions of units every month, barely existed on the German side. One German military doctor wrote in his memoir after the war that they had 1 doctor for 400 wounded, that morphine ran out in December, that they amputated limbs with dirty scissors and prayed. The process called triage, sorting the wounded by who could be saved and who could not, had become something merciless. Those classified as beyond help were sometimes moved to places that no one spoke about afterward. For female personnel who were not officially combat soldiers, the situation was even more uncertain. They fell into a legal gray area. No one was formally responsible for them. Ilse understood all of this, not from books, from the smell of dried blood in the medical station, from the screaming she heard through the thin walls at night, from the face of Renate the last time she saw it through the basement window, looking back from the truck that was turning the wrong way. And so she made her decision. She would hide the wound. From that day forward, she pressed her right arm against her body as though it were a natural part of her posture. The hot spot beneath her shoulder blade felt like an ember trapped under the skin. Every jolt on the road, every time she bent to tie her boots, every motion that required lifting her arm sent a bolt of fire from her shoulder down to her hip. But whenever a colleague asked Brenner, "Are you hurt?" she always answered with the same 2 words, "No, just tired." At night when the others slept, she bit down on her sleeve to keep from groaning. Sometimes the pain was so fierce she saw lights flashing behind her closed eyelids, as though her body were sending distress signals that nobody was receiving. During the retreat toward the Rhine, Ilse encountered Gerda Voigt, 35 years old, a former translator, the oldest woman in their group of female personnel. Gerda was tall, thin, with brown-gray hair pinned neatly behind her neck, in a bony face with bright, penetrating eyes that seemed to take inventory of everything they landed on. Before the war, she had translated English literature into German in Berlin. She spoke English like a native with an Oxford accent, the legacy of 3 years studying abroad before Hitler rose to power. Gerda noticed that Ilse was hiding something almost immediately. She saw the way Ilse always leaned to the left when sitting, the way the right sleeve of her jacket never moved, the way she sucked in a sharp breath every time their vehicle hit a pothole. But Gerda said nothing. In their world, knowing too much about another person was dangerous. Asking questions invited trouble. Silence was a survival skill. But Gerda remembered, and the time would come when silence was no longer an option. In March 1945, American infantry reached the village near Remagen and captured the Ludendorff Bridge in a feat that even American generals had not dared to hope for. It was the only intact bridge across the Rhine. The remnants of the German forces panicked. The sound of Sherman tank treads grinding over cobblestone streets was like the gnashing of iron teeth. Ilse and 7 other women, including Gerda, hid in the cellar of a farmhouse. Low ceiling, smell of rotting potatoes, cobwebs in every corner. Above them, boots pounded on the wooden floor. Voices in English drifted down through the boards, foreign and terrifying. They had prepared themselves to die. The Nazi propaganda leaflets that everyone had memorized said American soldiers would shoot prisoners like dogs. Women would be violated. Children would be starved. Ilse remembered the poster pinned to the wall at her signal station. It showed an American soldier with fangs and blood on his hands. She remembered how her colleagues looked at that poster every single day until the fear it carried became a truth that required no proof. Then they went up. 8 women, hands raised, hearts slamming. The first American soldier they saw was a boy, maybe 1920 at most. Freckles all over his face, helmet tilted to one side. He looked at the 8 women with an expression of pure confusion, like a student taking a test no one had given him the questions for. He lowered his weapon, looked around for someone with higher rank. When he found no one, he did the only thing he knew. He pulled out his canteen and offered it to the nearest woman. Another soldier asked in broken German, clearly learned from a pocket phrase book handed to troops before deployment. "Verwundet, is anyone wounded?" Ilse shook her head, fast, firm, even though her right shoulder was burning under her heavy jacket. She told herself in German, in the quiet theater of her own mind, "They say the wounded get taken away. I do not want to vanish." She twisted her mother's silver ring with her left thumb around and around, the way she always did when the fear was at its worst. Think about that for a moment. She trusted the propaganda of the people who had lied to her about everything more than she trusted the man who was handing her water. But put yourself in her place. If you had watched a friend loaded onto a truck that drove the wrong direction and never came back, would you trust a stranger in a foreign uniform just because he offered you a drink? From that point forward, Ilse's world became numbers and lists. The women were moved through temporary camps, then more camps. Names were recorded, heights and weights written down, photographs taken. They were sorted by occupation. Nurses, clerks, farm workers, like items on a shelf. By 1945, roughly 425,000 German prisoners of war would be shipped to camps in the United States. To move them, the Allies used trains to the ports, and then Liberty ships mass-produced cargo vessels, each capable of carrying more than 2,000 people across the Atlantic at a time. Ilse and 14 other women were loaded into a cattle car. Straw on the floor, a bucket in the corner. Light came through the gaps in the wooden planks and thin blades. Through those gaps, they watched Germany slide away. Scorched fields, collapsed houses, twisted rail lines, then France, then the ports. At the harbor, the air was thick with the smell of tar salt and diesel fuel. Chains clanked as cranes lifted crates onto the decks. When the prisoners were marched up the gangplank, some stared at the gray hull of the ship and thought they might never see land again. One prisoner wrote later that they did not know if they were going to work or to disappear. The Atlantic crossing took nearly 2 weeks. The sea was rough almost the entire time. Many were seasick. The hold smelled of sweat engine oil and stomach acid. Ilsa lay on a bunk in the lower deck, her right arm pressed against her chest, eyes staring at the iron ceiling. The skin stretched over the fragment was now tight and red like a blister about to burst. At night, the pain woke her like a fire alarm. She pressed her hand against it and felt heat radiating through her palm. Then one night, the 8th or ninth at sea, she could no longer remember which her body betrayed her. She spiked a high fever. Her skin burned from head to toe, yet she shivered as if standing naked in snow. The fragment in her shoulder was driving an infection now. Not slowly anymore. Fast, hot, spreading like fire through dry wood. The woman in the next bunk, a nurse named Margaret, 40 years old with dark hair and calloused hands, woke to the sound of Ilsa moaning in her sleep. Margaret touched Ilsa's forehead and jerked her hand back as if she had pressed it against a hot stove. "My God, you are burning up. We have to call the medic." Ilsa seized Margaret's wrist, squeezed hard, so hard that both of them felt bone pressing against bone. "Do not call anyone. If they find out I am wounded, they will separate me. I will never go home. Do you understand? Never." Margaret looked at her in the darkness. The dim light from a porthole was just enough to see Ilsa's eyes, not the eyes of someone afraid of dying, the eyes of someone afraid of disappearing, afraid of becoming a name on a list that nobody reads, afraid of becoming Renati. Margaret hesitated. Then she lay back down. But from that night on, she looked at Ilsa differently. With a mixture of pity and fear, the way you look at someone walking a tightrope when the rope is already beginning to fray. When the ship reached New York Harbor, the prisoners caught glimpses through narrow openings, tugboats hooting, seagulls crying, the distant shapes of skyscrapers so tall they looked unreal. Some prisoners saw the Statue of Liberty and laughed bitterly. Freedom. What did that word mean when you were traveling from one set of barbed wire to another? Then came more trains. Heading inland. The guards repeated one name with a strange enthusiasm. Texas. The prisoners knew Texas only from pictures in old magazines. Cowboys, cactus, desert, horses running against red sunsets. To them, Texas was as strange as the moon, and possibly just as barren. As the train rolled south, the air grew warmer with every state. Dust came through the cracks in the wooden cars and settled on their faces, their hair, their clothes. Ilsa's right shoulder throbbed with every beat of the wheels against the rails. She pressed her shoulder against the wall of the car, trying to hide the way her face twisted with every bump. But the sweat running down her temple gave her away to anyone who was looking carefully. In the seat across from her, Gerda Voigt was looking carefully. She said nothing, but the expression on her face made it clear that the time for silence was running short. Ahead of them, through the dust in the scrubland and the red dirt plains of central Texas, waited a place called Camp Swift. And inside that camp, a young American medic carried a secret of his own. Camp Swift sat on flat land about 30 miles east of Austin, near the small town of Bastrop, where the Colorado River cut through stands of loblolly pine. But inside the wire, there were no rivers and no pines. Only low scrub, red dirt, and long rows of white barracks stretched beneath a sky so blue, it looked like it had been hammered out of steel. In the Texas summer, the heat surrounded you. It was in the air you breathed, in the ground you stood on, in the water you drank. Dust got into everything: boots, beds, food, the spaces between your teeth. By the middle of 1945, Texas held somewhere between 50 and 80,000 German prisoners of war scattered across more than 70 camps throughout the state. Camp Swift alone could hold more than 10,000 soldiers and prisoners at any given time. In the mornings, the camp woke to the clang of the mess bell and the smell of coffee and bacon fat drifting from the kitchens. On the American side of the fence, soldiers complained about paperwork and drills and the heat that never seemed to break. On the German side, many prisoners were surprised to find 3 hot meals a day, real mattresses, and Coca-Cola available in the canteen. One German prisoner recalled later that they ate better there than they had during the last winter at home. It was confusing, he said. Corporal Walter Brandt found many things confusing, though he preferred the word pointless. Walter was 26 years old from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the city known for its beer, its bratwurst, and the largest community of German Americans in the entire country. Walter was the son of a pharmacist named Friedrich Brandt, who had emigrated from Stuttgart to America in 1921, year after the First World War ended, carrying a single suitcase and $30. Friedrich opened a small drugstore on North Avenue in the German neighborhood of Milwaukee. He sold aspirin, cough syrup, and free advice to anyone who walked through the door. Walter grew up between 2 languages, English at school, German at home. His mother spoke German when she was happy and English when she was angry, which meant he associated German with warmth and comfort and English with being in trouble. He spoke German well. The Stuttgart dialect filtered through a Milwaukee accent, a little rusty in certain corners, but clear and unmistakable to any native speaker. But when America entered the war, Walter buried that part of himself. In the United States military during wartime, carrying a German last name was already exhausting enough. Speaking German was like pinning a sign to your forehead that read suspect. Walter had watched the same thing happen to his father back home. 2 FBI agents came to the house on North Avenue and asked Friedrich whether he maintained contact with anyone in Germany. Friedrich, who had been an American citizen for 25 years, who paid his taxes, who bought war bonds every month, who hung the American flag outside his drugstore on every national holiday, looked at the 2 men and said no. But their eyes said the answer did not matter. The suspicion was already there. All it needed was the name Brandt. Friedrich wrote to Walter regularly, and in a recent letter, his careful handwriting carried a weight that Walter could feel through the paper. They came again, son, asked me if I am in contact with Stuttgart. I said no, but I saw them looking at the photograph of your grandparents on the wall, and I knew. My answer does not matter. To them, I will never be American enough. Walter had trained for combat, learned to fire the M1 Garand rifle, learned to move under machine gun fire, prepared himself for Europe. Then a training accident shattered the bones in his right leg. Now a steel rod held those bones together. Instead of Normandy or Bastogne, he had been sent to Camp Swift to work in medical administration. His days were mostly forms and numbers: height, weight, scars, blood pressure. He checked German prisoners who went to road crews and cotton fields. The paradox ate at him every single day. He had been trained to destroy German bodies, and now he handed those same bodies soap and recorded their pulse rates. He wrote in his journal one night, "I prepared for war the way you prepare for a storm. The storm came and went, but I am still standing inside the house looking out the window. They say I am lucky. Maybe they are right. But lucky and pointless sometimes taste the same." One hot afternoon in May, 2 trucks rolled through the camp gates carrying 15 German women in faded gray uniforms. Dust swirled around their boots as they climbed down. They stood straight, eyes forward, faces closed like shuttered windows. Female personnel from the Women's Army Corps took charge of them, separating them from the male prisoners. Word spread quickly. Frauen, female prisoners. Whole groups of women were rare among the hundreds of thousands of German POWs in America. Walter stood in the doorway of the medical hut and watched the new arrivals. One woman caught his attention. Thin, hair tied back, a tired face trying hard to show nothing. She held her right arm pressed tight against her side as though it were glued there. Her left arm swung naturally. Her right arm did not move at all. Even when the truck behind her backfired, a tiny shudder ran through her right shoulder like electricity, and her left hand moved instinctively to the silver ring on her finger, twisting it. Walter noted it in his mind, said nothing. It was not the right time. The next morning, Walter was ordered to perform medical checks on the new group. The examination room was a converted barracks, bare floorboards, a few wooden chairs, a metal table, A supply cabinet that smelled of rubbing alcohol and carbolic acid. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, accomplishing nothing. Staff Sergeant Helen Novak, the WAC supervisor, stood near the door with her arms folded. Novak was about 40 with a limestone face that missed nothing. The women came in one by one. Walter worked through the first 6 quickly. Names, ages, lungs through a stethoscope. Backs checked for scars. His pen scratched across forms. Ilse Brenner was 7th. She stepped forward quietly. Up close, she was younger than he had guessed. Early 20s, dust on her cheeks. Her gray jacket hung unevenly, the right shoulder lower than the left. Name Ilse Brenner. You speak English well. I learned in school. My father is a chemist in Heidelberg. Then silence. Any illness wounds pain. She hesitated 1 second too long, not searching for a word, searching for a lie. Walter recognized the difference. He had seen prisoners fake illness to avoid work. This was the opposite. She was hiding something to avoid attention. No, I'm well. He asked her to remove her jacket. She unbuttoned it with her left hand only. The right stayed pinned to her side. He asked her to raise both arms. The left went up easily. The right lifted a few centimeters before she gasped and stopped. Her face went white. The muscles in her jaw clenched until tendons stood out in her neck. The skin over her right shoulder twitched beneath a thin shirt as if something underneath were pulling. You are hurt, he said it softly. A statement, not a question. It is nothing. It will pass. Please, no hospital, no separation. Walter finished her form with neutral words, but he did not forget the heat he had felt radiating from her shoulder. He did not forget the way she flinched at his touch. And he did not forget the sentence that rose in his throat, the sentence he wanted to say in German, in her language, in the words that might have told her he was not entirely what she thought. He swallowed it back down. Not yet. That evening, Walter spoke with a male German prisoner, a former teacher from Cologne, who chose his words with the precision of a man who had once graded essays for a living. Walter asked why the woman might fear medical help so deeply. The teacher looked at him for a long moment. You must understand, Corporal. We were told that your kindness is the first trick. If we accept it, we begin to doubt everything we were ever taught. And for people who have already lost their country, their army, and their pride, doubt is the one thing they cannot afford. Walter lay on his bunk that night and realized the teacher's words did not only describe German prisoners. They described him too. Both sides had been taught that the enemy was a simple concept. A shape on a poster. Now the enemy had a tired face, a frozen arm, and a voice that trembled when it mentioned hospitals. The next time Walter saw Ilse Gerda Voigt served as translator, though Walter understood almost every word without help. He had to control his face each time Ilse spoke German, making sure he did not react before Gerda translated. A small performance, but exhausting. Ilse finally gave him something more than silence. She spoke in German, low and flat. Es brennt. Es brennt, wenn man es berührt. Gerda turned to Walter. She says it burns. It burns when you touch it. 6 words in English. 6 words that Walter Brandt would carry for the rest of his life. He requested permission from his commanding officer, Captain Harold Yates, to conduct a thorough examination. Yates was the kind of officer who valued procedure the way some men value religion. Efficient, cool, not cruel but not interested in individual prisoner stories. Yates agreed on the condition that a WAC supervisor remain present. That evening, the medical office, rubbing alcohol and old wood, a single bulb buzzing, Novak at the door. Ilse unbuttoned her shirt with her left hand and let it slide to her waist. Her back was a map of 4 months of silent war. Shiny, twisted scar tissue at the center, like candle wax hardened on skin. The edges, red, angry, inflamed. When Walter's fingertips moved across the surface, he felt it. Hard, round, like a small marble beneath the skin. And hot. hotter than anything that should come from a human body. How long? Since January. 4 months with foreign metal lodged beside bone. No antibiotics, no proper wound care. He knew what military medical literature said about this. Untreated deep wounds could kill more men than bullets did on the day of battle. Bone infection could begin at any time. Then blood poisoning. Then death. Not fast, slow, and full of suffering. This must come out soon. It is dangerous. And instantly the wall went up. No hospital, no operation. She told him why. In her slow, careful English, each word placed like a foot on thin ice. She told him about Renati, the truck that turned east, the field stations where men bit leather straps because morphine ran out months ago, doctors using dirty scissors in the dark. In Germany, the badly hurt were sent away. We did not see them again. I heard men scream all night. No medicine, no clean tools. I would rather stay here. Then she turned to Gerda and spoke in German, and Walter heard every word, though he kept his face perfectly still. Better to die quietly among people you know than on a table among strangers. That was not logic from a textbook. It was logic built from blood and screaming. 5 days of persuasion began. Each day Walter tried a different approach. Each day the wall held. Day 1, pure reason. He explained penicillin, sterile operating rooms, trained surgeons. Ilsa listened politely and refused. To her, these were just words from an enemy uniform. Day 2. He asked Gerda to speak with Ilsa privately. Gerda tried. Ilsa answered with a question. You believe them, Gerda? Just because they give us coffee every morning and bacon every afternoon. Gerda, for once, had no answer. Day 3. Walter brought a medical file, the name blacked out of another German prisoner who had undergone successful surgery at Camp Swift. Fragment removed from the thigh. Full recovery. Back in the fields within 6 weeks. Ilsa read every page slowly, then pushed it back across the table and shook her head. Each evening, Walter checked her shoulder. Each evening, the redness had spread a little further. The infection was not waiting for her to make up her mind. On the 4th day, Captain Yates called Walter into his office. A small room, desk fan clicking, map of Texas on the wall. Brant, I hear you have been spending considerable time on one female prisoner. If she refuses treatment, that is her right. Log it as refused treatment and move on. We are not short on work. Walter understood exactly what those words meant. If he wrote refused treatment in her file, no one would ever look at it again. Ilsa would vanish into the system. One line among thousands, the fragment would keep poisoning her. And in a camp where nobody had particular reason to worry about one German woman among tens of thousands of German men, she could die and become nothing more than a number in a monthly report. Follow the order. Easy, safe, correct by every written rule. Or keep trying, exhausting, risky, possibly futile. With respect, sir, if she dies from an untreated wound while in our custody, that is also paperwork. The kind that goes up, not sideways. Yates looked at him for a long time, then waved his hand. 2 more days, Brant. Then it gets filed. 48 hours. Walter walked out, knowing that if he could not break through the wall in 2 days, he would lose her to the system. On the morning of the 5th day, the last day, Walter signed out the key to the dispensary cabinet. The room was small, cool, and dim, lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. Glass bottles in neat rows, metal trays gleaming softly. The smell of antiseptic was strong, sharp in the nose, the kind of smell that clears your head, whether you want it cleared or not. Walter had known this smell since childhood. His father's drugstore on North Avenue. The smell of medicine, the smell of things that could be fixed. He brought Ilsa to that room. A guard stood at the door. Gerda was not present, just the 2 of them in the cabinet. And then Walter did the thing he had hidden from everyone for the entire length of his military service. He spoke German, not the slow, simple English he had been using. German. His German. The Stuttgart dialect filtered through Milwaukee, a little rusty, but clear and warm and honest in a way that no other language could imitate. A mother tongue does not lie. Ilse. Mein Vater ist Apotheker. Kommt aus Stuttgart. Ich bin mit diesem Geruch aufgewachsen. My father is a pharmacist. He comes from Stuttgart. I grew up with this smell. She froze. 2 seconds. 3. Her eyes went wide to a not ordinary surprise. The kind of shock you feel when the ground you are standing on shifts beneath your feet. For weeks she had spoken to him through a wall of language, through a translator, through simple English sentences that both knew were not enough. That wall had not only blocked words, it had blocked familiarity. It had kept him on the other side, the enemy side. Now the wall was gone, and behind it was not an enemy. Behind it was the son of a German pharmacist, standing in a room full of medicine, speaking her language. He opened the cabinet, showed her what was inside. Rows of clear glass ampoules filled with morphine, each one containing enough to carry a person into painless sleep. White tin boxes of sulfanilamide powder. Rolls of sterile bandages, white and soft. Stainless steel surgical instruments wrapped in cloth gleaming under the single light. He placed a vial of morphine in her hand. She held it, felt its weight, felt the coolness of the glass against her palm, read the English label slowly. Morphine sulfate, 15 milligrams per milliliter. U.S. Army medical supply. A small vial. But in her hand it weighed more than the cattle car that had carried her across Germany. She had been told Americans were savages, that prisoners would be starved and beaten. Instead, she was holding more medicine than her entire unit had seen in 6 months. This was not propaganda. This was not a promise. This was reality, cold and solid, resting in her palm. She asked in German, her voice trembling slightly, "Why did you hide it?" Your German Walter was quiet for 3 seconds. 4, long enough for her to see he was genuinely thinking. For the same reason you hid yours. Because I thought if they knew everything, I would change. 2 people in a cool room full of medicine in the middle of a Texas summer. Both had hidden something. She had hidden metal in her shoulder. He had hidden a language in his throat, both for the same reason. The fear of being seen differently, of being separated, of being processed. That symmetry, unplanned and unscripted, broke through the thing that every logical argument had failed to crack. Do you promise that I will not wake up screaming in pain? I promise they will put you to sleep. They will take the metal out, and then you will heal. She looked at him, looked at the cabinet, looked at the vial of morphine in her hand. Something in her eyes shifted. Less like a wall, more like a door, just barely open. I will sign. The transfer paperwork went to Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, the largest military hospital in Texas, a facility that had processed thousands of casualties from both theaters of the war. Military paperwork moved at the speed of bureaucracy. Infection moved at the speed of biology. During the days it took for approval to arrive, Walter checked Ilse's shoulder every evening. Every evening the redness had grown. Gerda Voigt found Walter one afternoon near the mess hall, the sunset painting the camp swift dust in shades of orange. She is afraid you will hurt her, not because you are cruel, but because you do not know her. She has seen men cut open with barely enough morphine to dull a toothache. She thinks it is better to let the wound decide than the surgeon. Then Gerda said something Walter did not expect. But since you spoke German to her, she has changed. She says you remind her of her father. Do not let her down. The army truck rattled north. Dust rose behind it in a long brown tail. Inside, Ilse sat with her right arm in a proper sling, a guard across from her, Walter beside her. The smell of hot canvas and engine oil. Every pothole sent fire through her shoulder. But the fear in her stomach was sharper than any fragment. Brooke Army Medical Center. Long, low buildings painted white, screen windows. Inside the cool hit her first. Fans turning, polished floors. Nurses in white moving quickly but quietly pushing carts that rattled with metal trays. By 1945, the United States Army had built one of the most extensive medical systems in history. More than 300,000 beds in military hospitals around the world. For many German units at the end of the war, numbers like those would have sounded like fantasy. Major James Aldrich, the surgeon, gray at his temples, steady hands that had operated in North Africa and at Anzio before being rotated back to the States. He examined Ilse's back, pressing gently until he found the hard point beneath the skin. He let out a low whistle, shell fragment, that is what she says. Since January. 4 months, it is a wonder she is still walking. The night before surgery, Ilse lay in a hospital bed. Clean sheets. She had not felt clean sheets since leaving Heidelberg. She ran her palm across the fabric, slowly feeling the smooth weave of cotton. She thought about the paradox pressing down on her. The enemy she had been taught to fear was about to try to save her life. Using medicine her own army did not have. Using a blade her own doctors had not dared to use because they had no anesthetic. Early morning. Orderlies with a rolling stretcher. Wheels humming on polished floor. The corridor lights were blinding. The operating room doors stood wide, their metal edges catching the light. Walter sat in the waiting area. Bitter coffee, old magazines. Time moved like warm tar. He thought about bone and blood and how easily both could fail without warning. The surgery lasted nearly 3 hours. Aldrich explained afterward that the fragment had been wedged between the scapula and the third rib, encased in scar tissue and surrounded by pockets of pus. He had to cut through layer after layer, remove dead tissue, irrigate the wound repeatedly, pack it with sulfanilamide and gauze. Another month, Aldrich said, and the infection would likely have reached the bone. He let the sentence trail off. He came out still wearing his green surgical gown, holding a small glass vial. Inside, floating in clear fluid, was a twisted piece of dark metal about the size of a fingernail. American 105mm howitzer fragment, most likely. Quite a traveler. Walter took the vial. It felt heavier than it looked. He held it up and watched the metal turn slowly in the fluid. That tiny shard had crossed a village, a country, an ocean, and now sat trapped in a few inches of glass. Such a small thing, he thought, for so much pain. When Ilse woke, her shoulder felt thick and dull, wrapped in tight bandages. There was pain, but it was different. Deep and aching, already beginning to fade. Not the sharp, relentless burning that had haunted her for 4 months. They showed me, she told Walter that afternoon. Her voice was soft, blurred slightly by morphine. Real morphine properly dosed in a clean hospital with a nurse monitoring her pulse. A universe away from the field stations where men bit leather and prayed. They let me hold it. 4 months it tried to kill me, and now it sits in a bottle. While Ilse recovered over the following 2 weeks, nurses changing her dressings daily, the wound seeping less, each time the antibiotics doing work, her body could never have managed alone events. At Camp Swift, we're setting something else in motion. A counterintelligence corps officer arrived to interrogate German prisoners as part of routine post-war screening. During one session, a male prisoner mentioned in passing that the medical corporal Brandt speaks very good German, almost like one of us. Captain Yates called Walter in. "Brandt, you speak German." There was no room left to hide. "Yes, sir. My father is German-American, from Stuttgart originally. And you did not report this. You know the regulations on foreign language declaration. Why did you conceal it?" This was the moment Walter decided he was finished hiding. Not just for this conversation. For good. For the same reason my father in Milwaukee is being watched by the FBI, even though he has been an American citizen for 25 years, sir. Because when your name is Brandt, speaking German is not a skill. It is a suspicion. Yates studied him. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered in May. Camp Swift needed people who could speak German more than it needed people who could fill out forms. Yates did not punish him. He reassigned Walter as the official medical interpreter for the prisoner compound. The secret Walter had buried to protect himself became the thing that pulled him deeper into the world he had tried to keep at arm's length. That evening, Walter wrote to his father, "Pa, today I spoke German in front of my commanding officer. Nobody shot me. Nobody called me a spy. Maybe I have been afraid of the same thing for too long without good reason. Or maybe the reason changed and I did not notice." When Ilsa returned to Camp Swift in early summer, the other women noticed the change before she spoke of it. She smiled more. She joined the small jokes that passed between them in German. In the steamy wash house, she hummed old songs from Heidelberg student songs, drinking songs, melodies that had nothing to do with empires or enemies. One woman said later that it was as if a weight had been cut from her body and her mind at the same time. Walter saw it too. At each checkup, he watched her raise her arm a little higher. The scar was ugly but clean. No more heat, no angry red edge. He was not a poetic man. He was a pharmacist's son who believed healing was a measurement, not a metaphor. Degrees of temperature, centimeters of motion, milligrams of medicine. But even a man who trusted numbers could see that the numbers on Ilse Brenner's chart were telling a story that went beyond medicine. August 1945. The war was over everywhere. Germany had surrendered in May. Japan followed in August. The world exhaled. But at Camp Swift, the exhale brought cotton. Texas cotton was ready for harvest. White bowls covered fields that stretched to the horizon, so vast they looked like snow on brown earth, a strange illusion in summer heat. In 1945, Texas alone had more than 5 million acres planted in cotton. With millions of American men still in uniform, farmers were desperately short of hands. German prisoners filled the gap. Roughly 100,000 of them across the United States worked in agriculture that year. Buses carried prisoners to the fields at dawn. Men and women together, long lines of faded gray uniforms between rows of white plants, watched by guards who carried rifles slung over their shoulders, but aimed at nothing. Each prisoner received a canvas sack in one instruction: pick. The work was brutal. Cotton feels soft as cloth, but on the plant the dried casing is sharp enough to slice a fingertip. After 30 minutes, fingers bled. After an hour, back screamed. Guards call water breaks in English that most prisoners did not understand but had learned to obey. A heavy-set guard from East Texas with sunburned ears made it his mission to teach the German women English words: cotton, dirt, sun, water, bug. He pointed and spoke slowly, and the women repeated, and sometimes everyone laughed, and for a few seconds, the barbed wire faded. Ilsa's shoulder complained at first. Every reach pulled at healing muscles. She worked slowly using her left hand, mostly testing the right, a little further each day. Walter came to the field sometimes with the camp doctor, checking for heat exhaustion. He spoke German to her now without hesitation, without looking over his shoulder. How is the arm better, really better? And this time, neither of them had to weigh the words before saying them. The paradox of those fields cut deep if you thought about it. These people had worn enemy uniforms. Now they bent over American soil, their bleeding fingers pulling white fibers that would dress the nation that had defeated them. And their conqueror was giving them water, food, medical care, and 80 cents a day in canteen coupons. This was too complicated for propaganda posters. Too human, too ordinary. At night behind the wire, Ilsa wrote to her father in Heidelberg, "We are still prisoners, Papa, but we are not treated as animals. They feed us 3 meals. Real bacon, real coffee. It is difficult to remember what we were told about these people. Perhaps you were right. When the war ends, no one will admit they believed." Walter wrote to Milwaukee, "A young German woman carried a piece of our artillery in her shoulder across an ocean. I helped take it out. I was trained to break bodies. But here I stitch and record and reassure. The enemy has faces and names. Living with that is harder, but maybe it is better." As the harvest ended and cooler air finally arrived, orders shifted. Some prisoners would go home soon, others would stay longer. Radio broadcasts brought news of occupation zones, the Nuremberg trial cities rebuilding. The war that had thrown them together was ending, but its echoes were only beginning. Walter received his own news. Discharge in a few months, back to Milwaukee, his father's drugstore, a world without barbed wire or cotton fields, or the sound of German spoken in a Texas medical hut. One evening, watching a Texas sunset smear itself across the sky in colors too vivid to seem real, he told Ilsa he was leaving. They stood near the fence between the medical area and the prisoner compound. Wire cast thin shadows on red dirt. The air smelled of dust and cooling earth. Ilsa listened, then spoke in German, softly, the way people speak when they have thought about something for a long time. You will go home. I will go home. But we will not be the same as when we left. She touched her right shoulder. Not wincing now, just touching the way you touch a scar you have lived with long enough to consider part of yourself rather than damage. I will always carry this. And also what happened here. February 1946. Winter air lay thin and cold over Camp Swift. Orders had come. A transport of roughly 300 German prisoners would leave for Europe. Ilsa's name was on the list. So was Gerda's. On their last morning, the women lined up near the gate with small bundles, some clothes, letters, a photograph. The mess hall smelled of oatmeal and coffee. The same smells that had greeted them every morning for months now waited with the knowledge that this was the last time. Trucks waited by the gate, engines ticking. Walter met Ilsa near the infirmary. The winter light was pale, the kind that makes everything look like a slightly overexposed photograph. Gerda stood a few paces behind, watching with her bright, penetrating eyes, arms folded, saying nothing but clearly unwilling to miss this moment. Walter held something in his hand, the glass vial, the fragment floating inside, dark and ugly and clean. The surgeon kept this on a shelf. I thought you should have it. Ilsa took the vial and turned it slowly between her fingers. The glass felt cool. She was not twisting her mother's ring anymore. She was turning the vial the same way she used to turn the ring, around and around, but this time there was no fear in the motion. Just wait. Just memory. What will I do with such a thing, or whatever you like? Keep it. Throw it away. It is your story now. She slipped it into her bag next to her papers. I will put it on my desk one day, to remember that an enemy's knife saved me from my own army's shell. They shook hands. Brief, proper. Novak stood nearby with her arms folded, the same posture she had held on the first day Ilsa walked into the medical hut. Gerda gave Walter a single nod, which from Gerda Voigt was the equivalent of an embrace. Then the women climbed into the truck. The engine roared. Dust rose. The camp shrank behind them. The journey home reversed the one she had made. Trucks to trains, trains to a ship, salt air and gray ocean. By late 1946, most of the roughly 370,000 German prisoners held in the United States would cross the Atlantic going east. They had come as soldiers of an empire that proclaimed it would last 1,000 years. They left as people who had seen a different kind of power. Not the power of tanks or speeches, the power of full shelves, working lights, and hospitals that healed even the enemy. Ilsa returned to Heidelberg and found a city that had been spared the worst of the bombing, unlike Dresden or Hamburg or Berlin. The old buildings still stood. The university's stone walls were intact. But the city was exhausted. Food was scarce. The streets were crowded with refugees from the east. Shop windows were empty. The energy that once made Heidelberg feel like a place where the future was being invented had been drained away, replaced by the dull gray business of survival. Her father Heinrich was alive, thinner. His hair had gone completely white, as though the war had leached the color out of him. But his eyes were the same, steady, warm, carrying the particular sadness of a man who had understood what was happening long before others and had been powerless to stop it. He was working with American occupation officials to reopen the chemistry department at the university. The Americans needed German scientists, and Germans needed laboratories. And both sides needed to behave as though the recent past could be set aside. An imperfect arrangement. But imperfect was all anyone had. With help from new programs from what would become the Marshall Plan, pumping billions of American dollars into Western European reconstruction starting in 1948, and from old academic contacts, Ilse returned to her studies. She chose pharmacy. The connection was obvious to her, though she explained it fully only to one person in a letter to Milwaukee. It seemed right that I should work with medicine. After all, I am only here because someone had enough medicine to spare for a prisoner. By the early 1950s, West German factories were producing millions of doses of antibiotics every year. Penicillin, sulfanilamide, streptomycin. Drugs that had once been luxuries available only to Allied forces now flowed from German laboratories, serving not just Germany, but the recovering continent. At one of those laboratory benches in the pharmacy department of the University of Heidelberg stood a woman in a white coat with a scar on her right shoulder that she no longer tried to hide. On her desk, beside a microscope and a notebook filled with chemical formulas in small, precise handwriting, sat a glass vial containing a twisted piece of dark metal. Walter returned to Milwaukee. He took over the drugstore on North Avenue when Friedrich retired. The old man handed over the keys with a ceremony that consisted of nothing more than placing them in his son's palm and saying in German, "It is yours now. Take care of the people who come through that door." The store smelled of chalk rubbing alcohol and paper. Shelves held rows of pills and powders, like the dispensary at Camp Swift, but smaller and more peaceful. He married Ruth, the daughter of a German-American family from the Milwaukee community, a woman who understood why he sometimes spoke German in his sleep, why he kept a box of letters in a locked drawer, and why on certain summer evenings, when the heat reminded him of Texas, he would stand on the front porch and look south at nothing for a very long time. The letters between Walter and Ilse continued for decades. Not love letters, something harder to name. The correspondence of two people who shared a single memory that no one else on earth could fully enter. A cool room full of medicine. A voice speaking German where German was not expected. A vial of morphine resting in an open palm. The moment a wall came down, not because someone argued it down, but because someone on the other side turned out to be familiar. In 1952, Ilse sent a black and white photograph. She stood in front of the rebuilt University of Heidelberg pharmacy degree, in hand white coat, smiling a smile no one at Camp Swift had ever seen. On the back in her careful handwriting, "Dear Walter, I thought you would want to know that I finished. I still have the fragment. It reminds me that even very small pieces of metal and very small acts of mercy can change the course of an entire life." Walter read the letter behind the counter of his drugstore between a customer waiting for a prescription and the sound of the bell above the door. He showed the photograph to Ruth. She looked at it for a long time. "She looks like someone who survived something." Walter nodded. She did. We both did. He put the letter in the box with the others. That box stayed in his desk drawer through the decades, through raising children, through Ruth's funeral, through the long afternoons of retirement, watching Milwaukee snowfall, thinking about dust and heat, and a voice saying in German, "It burns when you touch it." When his grandchildren gathered on the sofa and asked about the war for a school project, Walter told them, not about tanks or bombs, about a girl from Heidelberg with metal in her shoulder, about a room full of medicine, about the moment he spoke German and everything changed. When you hear about the war, do not only remember the fighting. Remember that the enemy was also a person. And sometimes helping that person was the most American thing you could do. Time passed the way it always does, indifferent to the stories people attach to it. Germany and the United States became allies. American money rebuilt German cities. German scientists worked alongside American ones. The Berlin Wall went up and came down. The Cold War started and ended. The big numbers filled history books. Billions in aid, millions of houses rebuilt, treaties signed, borders redrawn. But no page in any book mentioned the glass vial on Ilse Brenner's desk. Ilse lived into her 80s. She died peacefully in Heidelberg, the city where she was born, the city she had helped heal not with bricks, but with medicine. When her daughter sorted through her papers after the funeral among the certificates and photographs and records of a long career, she found two things that did not match the rest: a box of letters postmarked Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a small glass vial containing a piece of dark metal in clear fluid. The daughter held the vial to the window and watched the metal turn slowly in the light. She had heard the story many times, always told the same quiet way, always with the same pause at the moment when the American medic spoke German for the first time. But holding the vial was different from hearing the story. The vial was real. The metal was real. The scar had been real. The letters were real. The life her mother lived because of what happened in that Texas camp was real. She did not put them in a drawer. She gave the vial and the letters to a small museum in Heidelberg that collected everyday stories of the war and its aftermath. Not a grand museum with tanks and dioramas, a quiet place on a quiet street where every button and every letter told the story of one person who had lived through something enormous and come out the other side changed. Now the fragment sits in a glass case. The label reads, "Shell Fragment, removed from German prisoner Texas, 1945. The letters are displayed beside it, along with the photograph of Ilsa in her white coat, degree in hand, standing before the university that had been emptied and refilled just as she had been. Visitors walk past on quiet feet. Many do not stop. They are drawn to larger displays, maps with colored arrows, uniforms behind glass, the big stories. But some visitors stop. They lean close, they look at the vial, they read the label, they see the photograph, and they stand there imagining. The heat beneath skin, the long crossing of an ocean, a cotton field in Texas, a room full of medicine, a voice speaking German where no one expected it, a promise made across a divide that was supposed to be uncrossable. A guide tells the short version to those who ask. A young German woman, a hidden wound, an American medic who spoke her language. A choice to trust that went against everything both had been taught. Some visitors nod and move on. Others stand longer, thinking about the strange truth that in a world where millions died for flags and slogans and borders drawn by men who never had to fight for them, a small act of mercy between two enemies could outlast every speech, every treaty, every parade. Not because it was large, because it was real. Their story did not decide a battle, did not change a border, does not appear in any textbook. But in the space between a wounded German prisoner and an American medic who carried his own hidden burden, hatred gave way to something simpler and perhaps harder than love. The recognition that the person standing in front of you is also a person, also hurting, also afraid, also wanting to live. This was not propaganda, it was reality. Lived day by day in a hot Texas camp carried across an ocean and remembered for a lifetime. The vial is still there, catching the light, small and easy to miss. But it shows that even when nations shout in slogans, individuals can choose to listen in a different way. And sometimes a vial of morphine placed gently into an open palm, a sentence spoken in a language that sounds like home, a hand resting lightly on a shoulder that burns with 4 months of hidden pain. Sometimes that is enough. Not to win a war, not to change history, but to change one life, and then quietly to echo through the lives that follow.